All right, Joe, we'll say good morning. Let us begin. Thank you very much for accommodating me in being able to, Mirz Hashem, continue to give shir while still being at home. It's a great zichos. It feels like a little bit things coming full circle. A little bit of deja vu, giving Daf Yomi from my office, from my study at home. But again, thank you all for being so accommodating, and it's a great source to be able to continue our limud together. Our shir this morning is dedicated by our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Teves, Dovi and Nina Elman, in honor of their daughter Ayelet becoming a bas mitzvah. May she continue to be a source of nachas for the entire mishpacha. Our week of learning sponsors, Paul and Kathy Pollack, in memory of Paul's aunt Esther Pollack, Esther bas Zechariah, whose yahrzeit was on the 29th of Kislev, Sherry and Alan Steinmetz. On the occasion of the birthdays this week are their Bechor, Adam Steinmetz, and his Bechor, Judah, and with tremendous Hakara Satov for all of the Shiurim. Judy and Moshe ben Zion Pacino, in commemoration of the first yahrzeit of Moshe ben Zion's mother, Leah Rachel Bas Shmuel, and our ongoing Daf Yomi sponsorship in the Zchus of Refuah Shalema for Ruchama Aviva Bas Shein Lachana, and for Rachel Yehudis Bas Tova Gittel. But with that, let us begin. So we are Baruch Hashem. Today's daf is Daf Chaf Vav 26, and we are picking up in Mirz Hashem on Daf Chaf Hey Amud Beis. A lot to do today. So we're picking up 25b. We left off pretty much like in the middle of the page. Mar Baravashi. I'm sorry, a lot to do today. So Mar Baravashi, we'll say right across from Tos's low, literally middle of the page. So the Gemara says as follows: Mar Baravashi Ashkechel Ravina de Shayf Lebarte Biguharki de Arlo. So Mar Baravashi, most remember again, we're continuing in the sugya where we were discussing the idea of getting benefit from Isuri Hana. We're kind of going back a little bit, right? We learned about the fact that you could go ahead and heal yourself with anything that is aser, with the exception of three things: Gilei Arayos, Shvichos Damim, and Avodah Zarah. Immorality, idolatry, and bloodshed. So the Gemara now is going back to that sugya a little bit and speaking about the ability to derive benefit from that which is aser ba'ana. So the Gemara says, Mar Baravashi, Ashkechel Ravina de Shayfle Lebarte Biguharki de Arlo. So Mar Baravashi found Ravina. Ravina was literally like smearing on his daughter oil from Arla. Now it's interesting, Rashi says, Goharki de Arla, Boser Zeisim Kitana Mishum Refuah, de Kasavar Mutter de Hisrapos Bi Isuri Hana. So as I say, interestingly enough, what he did is this was oil from Arla olives. But the nature of this particular type of olive, Rashi points out, was underdeveloped, we'll call immature olives. So he was using Arla oil to go ahead and smear on his daughter for medicinal purposes. Amarle, so the Gemara says, so Mar Baravashi confronts Ravina about this, and he says, so you're allowed to go ahead and use Arla when there's a serious situation, sakana, but who says you're allowed to use Arla when there's not sakana? He said, my daughter has a fever. The fever is very intense, and the intensity of the fever makes it like a shas sakana, makes it like a time of danger. Others explained, others say that what Ravina said back to my Ravashi was, I'm not using the oil in a normative fashion. So because I'm not getting benefits from it, derech hana, in the normal form of hana, therefore ultimately, again, it is not going to be aser. Okay, so I'll say either two possibilities. Either the possibility that the Gemara is introducing us to the concept that halacha l'maisa, again, fever could be tantamount to sakana. We know certain types of fever certainly can be tantamount to sakana. That's aleph. And beis, that this was non-normative benefit. And as we saw already on Chaf Yamad Aleph, non-normative benefit ultimately, again, will not be aser. Good. The Gemara goes right to Rabbi say, now we're going to begin a sugya, which is pretty much going to take us through the majority of today's daf, which is actually really a dramatic discussion. So here we go. So the Gemara says, Itmar, Hano habalo li odam bal karcho. This is an interesting case. What happens if a person derives benefit from something, quote unquote, bal karcho, against his will? against his will. So we'll say, so what this means, we'll say, is as follows. I'll go ahead and I get benefit from something, but halacha l'maisa, I don't have intention to get benefit. So we'll see examples of this. But the idea over here is I'm getting benefit from something that is prohibited. But when we say, when we normally say bal karcha, against your will, that sounds like something is actively happening to you against your will. In this context, bal karcha just means I have no intention for it. There's no intentionality here. So ultimately, again, I'm getting hana from something that is aser, but ultimately, again, it's not with my will. It's against my will. So what's the status of such hana? Now remember, the assumption, of course, is that this hana is coming from something which is aser. So I'm deriving hana from something that is aser, but the hana is against my will. What's the halacha? So says the Gemara, Abayi Amar Muteres, Rava Amar Asura. Abayi says it's muter, Rashi says muteres, In Tzarech Lifrosh Hemena. So we'll see what this means. Abayi says muter, Rava says it's aser. Now we'll say, now what does this mean? When Abayi says it's muter, Abayi says, look, if you're getting hana from something that is aser, and it's happening against your will, or you have no intent, it's just happening against your will, you have no obligation to separate yourself from it. Rava says, even if it's happening against your will, you still have an obligation to separate yourself from it. So the Gemara says, Efshar v'kamachavein, lo efshar v'kamachavein. So we'll say, if it's a case where I could avoid the hana, but yet I still have benefit, and I have intention to benefit, or if I don't have the ability to avoid it, and I have intention to benefit from it, koli amalo pligida aser. Everyone will agree that halacha l'maisa, it's aser. Lo efshar v'lo mechavein. If again I don't have the ability to avoid it, v'lo mechavein, but I don't have intention to get benefit from it, koli amalo pligi d'shari. Everyone will agree that it's mutter. So ki pligi, where does the machlokes case come up? The efshar v'lo mechavein. Ultimately, again, where I have the ability to avoid the hana, technically I could avoid it, v'lo mechavein. But ultimately, again, I don't have intention to benefit from it. Va'alibud Rabbi Yehuda Damar Davar Shein Miskavin Aser. According to Rabbi Yehuda holds there's something for which you don't have. This is Rabbi Yehuda from Shabbos, right? This Rabbi Yehuda from Masechah Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda that says that you could drag a bench across the field. You could drag a bench across the field, and even though, again, you may go ahead and create a furrow, you are not going to be chayiv, because that is a davar she'eno miskavin. Even Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that davar she'eno miskavin aser, koli amalo pligida aser. Everyone will agree that halacha l'maisa, this will be aser. Ki pligi, where does the machlokes come up? To Rabbi Shimon. Ultimately, again, Rabbi Shimon, what does Rabbi Shimon say? Davar she'eno miskavin mutter. Rabbi Shimon says that a davar she'eno miskavin ultimately is mutter. Abayi Rabbi Shimon, Abayi will be like Rabbi Shimon and will say that as long as you don't have kavana to get benefit from the davar ha'aser, from the davar ha'aser, then ultimately, again, the benefit is fine. And Rava says, Adkan, Rava Amar, sorry, I'm not sure what happened over there. Did I lose everyone there for just a moment? Okay, not sure. This might be my internet. I'm sorry. Okay, the Gemara says, "Rava Amar Ad Kalo Kam Rab Shimon Ela Heichadolo Efshar," and Rava says, up until this point, Rab Shimon did not go ahead and permit benefit only when there's no other possibility of a heichad de efshar. But if there's the possibility to avoid hana from the davar ha'aser, then of course one must do so. To which the Gemara says, "Ikadam." We're both saying alternate version, and this is the version we're really going to be focusing on over here in our Gemara. This is the version we're going to be focusing on. Ikadam. Others explain efshar v'lo mechavin. Supposed to listen to this. Everyone agrees in the following case: efshar v'lo mechavin, which is, what does this mean? Efshar means I can avoid getting hana from the item which is aser, right? I can avoid it, but ultimately, again, I don't have kavana to get benefit. So hainu plugtaihu to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon. So we'll say that's the machlokes, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, right? Because again, we'll say that's the machlokes about whether or not one is chayiv for a davar she'eno miskavin. Lo efshar v'lo kamachavin. Watch this. If I can't avoid the hana, and I don't have intention to derive benefit from the hana, kuli amalo plagi shari. Everyone will agree that halacha l'maisa, it's totally permitted. So pligi pligi, Rabbi say, what is the machlokes case? Where is there an argument? Ki pligi, Rabbi say, pay very close attention to this, because this is going to be the case that we are going to spend virtually the rest of the shir focusing on. So where is the machlokes case? Ki pligi, de lo afshar the kamachavin. The machlokes Rabbi says in the following case: de lo afshar, I don't have the ability to avoid getting hana the kamachavin. And once I can't avoid it, sahaloch l'mais again, I have kavanah to keep getting benefit. I have kavanah. So it's lo afshar. I can't avoid the hana, the kamachavin. But again, ultimately, once I can't avoid it, so I have no problem. I have kavanah to benefit from it. So we'll say, watch this. What's the halacha in this kind of case? V'aliba de Rabbi Shimon. According to Rabbi Shimon, Dazel Basar Kavana. So according to Rabbi Shimon, who says everything is about your kavana. So in this case over here, my kavana is to benefit, from the item that is aser. So according to Rabbi Shimon, it says that everything is based on kavana. When you have kavana to benefit from something that is aser, even though it was unavoidable that you were going to benefit from it, but now you have kavana to benefit from it, that is going to be aser. Keep ligi. Where does the machlokes come up? Alibud Rabbi Huda. Both say the machlokes comes up according to by Rabbi Huda. The Amar Loshna miskavin v'loshna she'in miskavin. Who holds that halacha l'maisa? Rabbi Huda holds that ultimately, again, it's not a question of kavana, it's a question of efshar. And efshar, if we're talking about a case, ultimately, again, where it's possible to avoid the hana, and you don't do so, that's aser. But once it's impossible to avoid the hana, ultimately, again, it is going to be mutter. Loshna Shim is coming efshar aser. Abai Rabbi Huda. So Abai will hold ultimately again like Rabbi Huda. And I will say, therefore, Abai will say that once we're dealing with the case of lo efshar, where I can't avoid the hana, once I can't avoid it, then ultimately, again, it becomes mutter. And even if I have kavanah to benefit from it, it doesn't matter. So the Gemara is the top of Chavav. Rabbi will say, Rava will say, Ad kan lo ka'amar Rabbi Huda shemis kavin kimis kavin el l'chumra. So Rabbi says, no. Rabbi Huda only held that halacha l'maisa, that not having kavana is like kavana only l'chumra. But miskavin she'im miskavin l'kula lo. Rabbi will say he did not espouse the shita that miskavin should be like, it's not miskavin in a case where it yields a leniency. So therefore, we'll say what's coming out over here is as follows. The Gemara now is framing that the machlokes case is in the following situation. So we'll say, I'll give you the example. The Rush and the Ran bring down the same type of case. Their example is where halacha l'maisa, again, I'm walking down a path, and it happens to be, again, the only path I can go ahead and take passes by a house of avodah zarah. That's the only path I could take. Or let's say that's bad. And from the house of avodah zarah, they're burning incense, and there's a beautiful aroma that comes out of the house of avodah zarah. A beautiful aroma. So we'll say, let's deal with the following case. Let's assume right now that's the only path I could take. That is the only path I could take. That's called lo efshar. Lo efshar. There's no other path for me to take other than by the house of avodah zarah. So we'll say, so now again, and what happens? I pass by the house of avodah zarah, and now once I pass by it, I say, wow, gishmak, that smells beautiful. That's kamachade. So it's lo efshar. I don't have the ability to avoid the hana, but kamachade. And ultimately now I'm going ahead and enjoying the scent. Once I have to go there, I'm enjoying the scent. So we'll say, now the shaila is, have I violated benefiting from an Isser Hana or not? So this is the machlokes Abaye and Rava. Abaye says, at the end of the day, everything is about efshar. Was it avoidable? Was it not avoidable? If it's not avoidable, then by definition, you're not chayiv, even if you end up benefiting from it. Rava says, at the end of the day, it's all a question of intent. Even if something is unavoidable, if you have kavana to benefit from the davar ha'aser, then ultimately, again, that is going to be problematic. So we'll say that's the machlokes, and that is what we are going to focus on now. So let's go. Chav Vav Amadafa, we'll say 3 lines down. Enter the 3rd line. Amar Abaye says, Mina minallah. From where do I know Mina amin Allah. From where do I know my particular shita? So remember again, Abaye's idea is halacha l'maisa. It's all dependent on efshar. Is it avoidable? Is it not avoidable? If it's avoidable, you're going to be chayiv. If it's unavoidable, then ultimately, again, you won't be chayiv. So the Gemara says, Amar Abaye mina amin Allah. This sanya, they learned in a brayso, Amru alav al Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. They say about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Let's listen to this. Shayoshev b'tzilo shel heichal v'darish kol yom kol. This is so incredibly beautiful. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, when the Jews would come to be Ola Regel, when they would come ultimately again to come to Yerushalayim, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkos, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai would give a shir. He'd give a shir. There are so many people who wanted to attend the shir of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai that his base medrash could not contain the crowds. So what happened? They used to situate themselves outside of the walls of the Beis Hamikdash, and they would sit in the shade of the walls of the Beis Hamikdash. What an incredibly beautiful image! No, they would sit in the shades of the walls of the Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara says, Yoshua says, "V'darish kol yom kulo." Supposed to say, now one second. That is benefiting from the Beis Hamikdash. We'll say, is that not benefiting from the walls of the Beis Hamikdash, which sounds like could be potential? Remember, the Beis Hamikdash is aser ba'ano. Sounds like that should be aser ba'ano. So listen to this. Sigmar tzvahahacha delo efshar mechave. Now we'll say, now what is that a case? That's a case of lo efshar. Lo efshar. We'll say there was nowhere else Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to give the shir. There was nowhere else. The lo efshar umechaving. But they clearly had kavana to go ahead and get benefit. Vishari, and it was permitted. So we'll say, so this seems to be a raya, like Abaye. Abaye says that lo efshar mechavin, right? We'll say, so Abaye says at the end of the day, everything is about avoidability. If it is unavoidable for you to benefit from an Isser Hana, then once it's unavoidable, you're not chayiv. And we don't care if you have kavanah to benefit, don't have kavanah to benefit. If it's unavoidable, you're not going to be chayiv. And Abai says, here's my raya. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had nowhere else to give shir. There was nowhere else. Therefore, by definition, because there was nowhere else to give shir, even though they were clearly benefiting from the Beis HaMikdash, from the shade of the Beis HaMikdash, halach l'maisa, it was mutter. Sabai says, you see from here that lo efshar umechavin is going to be mutter. To which the Gemara says, Rava will say, no. Shiny heichal dilatocho asui. Rava will say, that's not a good raya, Rabbi, because the truth is, that's not really called benefiting from Isser Hana. Why? Because Rabbi will say, the Beis HaMikdash was made to benefit from the interior, not from the exterior. So using the exterior shade of the walls of the Beis HaMikdash is not really called using something that is Asr Ba'ana. An interesting idea. Sefer Rava says it's not really a raya. Amar Rava, so Rava comes along and says, Mina min Allah, from where do I know my shita? Right, so from where do I know my particular opinion? That halacha l'maisa again, did Rabbi say once you have kavana, right? According to Rava, so we'll say according to Abai, it's all about efshar. It's all about avoidability. If something is avoidable, you're chayiv. If something is unavoidable, you're not chayiv. And once it's unavoidable, whether you had kavana or not is inconsequential. According to Rava, it's all about kavana. Even if something was totally unavoidable, if halacha l'maisa, again, you had kavana to go ahead, you had kavana to benefit, you're going to be chayiv. So listen to this. Amar Rava, Mina min Allah, from where do I know this? But say, this is incredible. The Sanya, lulin hayu psuchin ba'aliyas beis kachik elishon. Listen to how beautiful this is. There were upper windows, but these were like large windows. There were large windows that opened in the upper story of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Rabbi said, why were there windows? Shebahen mishalshlan es ha'umnim b'tebos. Listen to this. What would they do? Obviously, at different times, there had to be repairs done in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So what would they do? They would lower the craftsmen in through the upper windows down into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now, what they would do, Rabbi say, is the craftsmen would essentially be lowered in boxes. These boxes would be closed on three sides and open only on one side. Open on the side on which they had to do the work. Now, why did they do that? They did that in order that the craftsmen should not benefit from gazing upon the Kodesh HaKadoshim. They shouldn't benefit from gazing upon the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So the Gemara says, lo efshar v'kamechabim. So we'll say, what is this a case of? This is lo efshar. It's unavoidable. In other words, the repairs have to be done inside of the Beis Hamikdash, so it is unavoidable. The repairs must be done, the Kamachavein. But yet again, I will say, what are we concerned about? That the craftsmen are going to dafka want to benefit from what they see around the base, around the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Asr, and it's Asr. So he says, Rava, this is a raya to me, that what is it all about? We'll say it's all about intentionality. Even if something is unavoidable, right? Even if something is totally unavoidable, halacha l'maaseh, again, if you have intention to get benefit from it, it is going to be Asr. V'tizbara. But one second, we'll say there's another problem with this, and this is really quite fascinating. That ultimately Rabbi Shimon Pazi said in the name of Bar Kafra, Kol umare v'reach in ba mishum me'ilah. That we'll say in general, Kol, which is sound, Mare, that which you see, v'reach and scent, there is no me'ilah by these things. So therefore, I will say, even if you were to lower the craftsman into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and he were to look around and actively derive benefit from what he was gazing upon in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, that's not called Me'ilah. That's not called Me'ilah, right? I will say there's no Me'ilah by Re'iyah, by sight. So rather, the Gemara says, Ela Ma'ila Asur Beis Kodesh HaKadoshim. You're right. So therefore, again, can't really bring a raya over here, I will say. Rather, this must be what? They were just more machmir in the Holy of Holies. Even though, technically speaking, even if the craftsmen were to actively gaze upon the Kodesh HaKadoshim and derive benefit from it, technically speaking, that's not Me'ilah, but nevertheless, by the Kodesh HaKadoshim, there are more machmir. Fine, so we'll say, the machlokes continues. Others say, Rava says, where do I learn my shita? We're supposed to remember again, Rava's shita is, it's all about kavanah. Even if something was technically unavoidable, if you have kavanah to benefit, you will be chayiv. So says the Gemara, others explain, Amarava, Mina from where do I derive my shita? Tisanya, Amrav Shem Ben Pazi, Amrav Shem Ben Levi, Mishum Bar Kafra, Kol Umar Verech, and Ben Mishum Me'ilah. That ultimately, this is the alternate version of what we just learned before. That Kol, sound, Mare, sight, Reach, scent, are not subject to Me'ilah. Me'ilahu deleka, ha'isura ika. So we'll say there is no Me'ilah, but you see that it's still Asr. You see that it's still Asr. So we'll say, so Rava says, you see that it is still Asr to go ahead and gaze upon the Kodesh HaKadoshim. My lav la'osana omdim bifnim, de lo efshar v'kamechavein va'asr. Is this not referring to those ultimately again who are standing inside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim? Right? They will say they're standing inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim and to make repairs, and you see this is a case of lo efshar, it's unavoidable, but yet they have kavanah to derive benefit ultimately again from what they see va'asr. And Rava therefore says, you see here that even in a situation that is totally unavoidable, halacha l'maaseh, if you have kavanah to benefit, you're going to be chayiv. To which the Gemara says, lo, the osana omdim bachutz. No, it's actually referring ultimately again to those who are standing outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And Rashi points out over here, ka'amar ein me'ilah ha'isur ika, aval la'omdim bifnim afilu isur leka. Well, so I was talking about the people who are standing on the outside. So the people who are standing on the outside, ultimately again, that's not even, that's efshar, that's avoidable. And therefore again, for them, there's going to be an isur even though there's no me'ilah. But halacha l'maaseh, again, for those who are standing inside, who must do the repairs, there is not even an isur. So therefore, I will say, the machlokes still stands. The machlokes Abaye and Rava is still here, which is, what happens in a situation where it is unavoidable for you to go ahead and have benefit from an isur hana, but once it's unavoidable, you have kavanah to benefit. So Abaye will say you're not chayiv because everything is about efshar. Is it avoidable? Unavoidable. Once it's unavoidable, you're no longer chayiv. Rava says no, even if it's unavoidable, if you have kavanah to benefit, you are still going to be chayiv. That's the fundamental machlokes. Rava will say, just bear in mind that the Gemara also just put forward a very dramatic halacha that there is no me'ilah by intangibles, which we're going to come back to in a little bit as well. No me'ilah by intangibles. So no me'ilah by sound, by sight, by what you see, and by scent. We'll come back to that. Gufa. Here we go. We'll say, Kol umare v'rech imam shemi'ilah. So as we just said, that which you hear, right, sound, sight, that which you see, reach, that which you smell, are not subject to me'ilah. The Gemara says, but we learned, was that true? Is that true? The Gemara said, what we learned, also listen to this. There's an Isser Da'araisa to go ahead and make kitoras, make incense, to try to recreate the incense of the Beis HaMikdash. So if a person goes ahead and puts together, right, their own batch of kitoras. So if you do it lehislami ba, I'm not sure. I'm sorry. The YouTube didn't cut out. I'm sorry. Those were on YouTube. I'm not sure exactly what's. I'm sorry, Bose. Let's try this again. Okay. I'm sorry. So let me try. Okay, so we'll say, so the Gemara says as follows. So a person goes in and makes a personal batch of kitores, ultimately again, to go ahead and to learn how to make kitores, ola mosra letzibor, or I will say his intention is to go ahead and give it over to the tzibor pater. Ultimately, is pater. So we'll say, so therefore, if you go ahead and you make the kitores with the intention either to learn how to do it, or for the Beis Hamikdash, or you're making a batch that you're going to give over to the Beis Hamikdash, pater. Ultimately, again, one is pater. Lahariach, because we both say again in that situation, you're not chayiv. Ultimately, again, from kares or from chatos, you are pater from both kares and chatos, and the reason for that is because the only time you're chayiv is if you make ketoras for yourself on a. All right, well, I'm sorry. We seem to be having many technical issues today. I'm going to keep going with the hope that in Meretz Hashem you still hear me. So the Gemara says, however, if you go ahead and you make the kitoras with the intention to go ahead and smell it, then ultimately chayiv. V'hameriach ba. And one who goes ahead and actively smells, Rashi says, "V'hameriach ba" is biktorah shel tzibor. If halacha l'mayis again, a person actively goes ahead and tries. All right, we'll say, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what's happening here. It's telling me that that Zoom is logged in on a different device. So I apologize that I lost everyone, but I'm gonna keep going in Meretz Hashem. So the Gemara says as follows. I really apologize for this for the disruption. So the Gemara says as follows. So therefore, v'hameriach ba, but if one goes in and actively tries to smell kitoras, or actively does smell the kitoras that belongs to the tzibor, pater. Ultimately, again, one is pater, ela shema'al. But the halacha is one has committed mi'ilah. So the Gemara says, so what do you see from here, Bosai? So you see from here that if one goes ahead and actively smells kitoras, that halacha l'maisa, they have committed mi'ilah. So what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'maisa, there is mi'ilah by scent. Ela Amar Rav Papa, rather Rav Papa says, Kol umara ein bahem mishum me'ilah, v'fisha ein bahem mamish. The truth, Rav Papa revises this. Rav Papa says that both sound and sight are not subject to me'ilah because there's nothing tangible to it. Reach la'achar so reach, however, both say la'achar shetala t'mura so imam mishum me'ilah. Halvanasa. So this is very interesting. Both say so reach, apparently, so by scent there is me'ilah. There is mi'ilah. Rabbi said, interestingly enough, why is there scent by mi'ilah? So Rashi says there's something very interesting. Rashi says, Reach yesh bo mamish b'samemanam leficha chayiv. Because we'll say by reach, interestingly enough, the scent is rooted in something tangible. The scent comes from something tangible. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, it has mamashas, it has tangibility, and therefore one will be chayiv. But we'll say, but listen to this. The Gemara says, "V'reach la'achar shetala t'muras," but something very interesting occurs. But reach, after the pillar of smoke ascends, so this is by ketores. After the pillar of the ketores ascends, ein bo mishum me'ilah. Ultimately, again, it is not subject to me'ilah. Hoil v'nasis mitzvaso. Once the mitzvah has been done, meaning once you've offered up the ketores appropriately, then halacha l'maisa, the scent is no longer subject to me'ilah. I remember the chol that asks mitzvah ema b'shum me'ilah. Are you trying to tell me then that every time a mitzvah has been done, or as both say, once you perform a mitzvah with a particular item, it's no longer subject to me'ilah? Is that true? Watch this. So the Gemara says, "V'hari trumas hadeshen then asks mitzvah." So what's a trumas hadeshen? What's a trumas hadeshen? Is the ash that is placed by the Mizbeach. Now the ash is the leftover ash from the burning of the karbanos and the sacrificial limbs. So the Gemara says, V'yesho mishum me'ila, and yet the ash itself is still subject to me'ila. Dichsiv, this samo itzlam Mizbeach. The Torah says, shall place the ash next to the Mizbeach. Shelo yefazer v'shelo yehene. Which teaches me the ash dafka has to be placed by the Mizbeach, meaning you can't get benefit from the ash. So the ash is something which has already been used for a mitzvah, yet it is still subject to me'ila. Mishum dahavut shumas hadash no big day kuna shnei ksuvin abayin kechad. Because Rabbi say the truth is we're going to see shumas hadashen and big day kuna, specifically the clothing of the Kohen Gadol that he wears on Yom Kippur, are two examples of items which have been used for a mitzvah, but yet still are subject to me'ila even after they no longer have a use. Now, we have a concept in halacha of shnei ksuvin abayin ke'echad in malamdin, which means as follows: that halacha l'maisa, anytime you have a situation where the same halacha is taught in two circumstances, let me say differently. When halacha is taught in one circumstance, one situation, you can say that halacha is there to teach an overarching principle. When the same halacha is taught in two places, what that often tells us is that halacha only applies in two places and doesn't apply anywhere else. That's the concept of shnei ksuvin ein malamdin. Two instances of the same halacha cannot be used to generate an overarching principle. So the Gemara is suggesting as follows. Generally, the halacha is, once an item has been used for its mitzvah, it is no longer subject to me'ila. That's the general rule. There are two examples of where this does not apply. Where doesn't it apply? Trumas hadash, the Gemara is going to suggest, which means even after the ash has been used for its mitzvah, it is still subject to me'ila. And there's another example of this. What's the other example? Big day kahuna. We'll see this case right now. Dichsiv. So the Gemara says, first wide line above the bottom of Chavav and Aleph. Big day kahuna. What's the case of big day kahuna? Dichsiv v'nicham sham. Both sides, the pasuk says that when the Kohen finishes his avoda, v'hinicham sham, he will leave the clothing there. This teaches you, this is incredible, that the big day love on the simple white clothing of the Kohen Gadol that he uses for Yom Kippur require geniza, must be put away in a respectful fashion because they still retain their holiness even after being used for the avoda. So we'll say this makes sense according to the Rabbanan, who hold v'nicham sham teaches me that even after the clothing has been used, it requires geniza, it requires being put away. It requires being put away in a proper place, because the Gemara says El Rabdosa de Palagalai, but according to Rabdosa, who says, let's say, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what's happening over here. I keep getting a message that is being signed in by someone else who's the host. So I'm sorry. All right, so the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says, but according to Rabdosa, who argues and says, the Amar Avaru Uyin Heim LeKohen Hedjot, My V'Hinicham Sham. But according to Rabdosa, who says that actually the white clothing of the Kohen Gadol that is used on Yom Kippur ultimately again could be used by regular Kohen for the rest of the year. So what is there to say? To which the Gemara says, so the Gemara says, so according to that opinion, v'nicham sham means you can't go ahead and halacha l'maisa use it for a different Yom Kippur. So Michael and Meimar, so both there, what is there to say? Both say, because we'll say Chumas Adesha and Egla Arufa are two psukim that both come to teach the same principle. Now both say, now what does this mean? What would be the Egla Arufa? So Rashi says, Ksiv Sham, Temashmo Sham Te Kvurasa. So we'll say, by Egla Arufa, remember again, Egla Arufa halacha l'maisa is the situation where halacha l'maisa, you find a corpse in between two cities. You don't know again who is responsible for the murder. Remember again, the elders of the closest city come out, they break the neck of the calf, they wash their hands over the calf, they say, Yadinu lo shafchu dam zeh, our hands have not spilled this blood. So we'll say, by Egla Arufa, it also says Sham. It also says there, which tells me that even after the Egla Arufa has been decapitated, you must bury it there, i.e., it is subject to Isser Hana, even after the mitzvah has been performed. So therefore, according to this opinion, you can't learn it out from the Big Day Kuna, will say that Egla Arufa and Trumas Hadesh are Shnei Ksuvin Abayin Ke'echad, two instances where there is an Isser Hana even after the mitzvah has been performed, and therefore halacha l'maisa can't create an overarching principle. So we'll say this works well according to the opinion who says Shnei Ksuvim Abayim Ke'echad cannot be used to teach an overarching principle. But according to the opinion who says that it can, what can be said? It says two mi'utim. What are the two mi'utim? Visamo ksiv, harufa ksiv. Ultimately, again, it says visamo, it shall be placed, and arufa. So therefore, we'll say either way you can't learn it out. So we'll say, so interestingly enough, halach l'maisa, the Gemara seems to indicate to us that the Gemara wants to suggest, first of all, that by kol and by re'iyah, right, by sound and by sight, there is no me'ilah. By reach, by scent, there is me'ilah. Interestingly enough, that's the halacha. So the Gemara says, but however, what we do see is that normally we would say that after an item is used for a mitzvah, it is no longer subject to me'ilah. But halacha l'maisa, we do find certain exceptions to that, namely big day kahuna. We also find it by egla arufa, and potentially those subject to machlokas by big day kahuna. Good. Tashma hechnisa l'rafka. So we'll say now that we brought up egla arufa, we're going to continue on the egla arufa topic. So hechnisa l'rafka vidasha. We'll say if you take an egla arufa and you attach it to a team of oxen. So we'll say, so now you're taking the egla rufa, which remember, egla rufa you're not supposed to have worked. So I take an egla rufa, I attach it to a team of oxen. So kshera, the egla rufa is still kosher for use. So we don't view it as if it's been worked. So the Gemara says, now why are you attaching it to the team of oxen? Bishil shatinok, right? The Gemara says, but the reason, the mother of the egla rufa is attached to the team of oxen. You're attaching the egla arufa because halacha l'maisa, again, you want the egla to go ahead and nurse from its mother. That's why you're attaching it to the team. So what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, "Hichnisa ravka v'dasha kshera." Egla is still kosher. Bishol shatina for tidosh. But if you attach it to the team of oxen in order that it should nurse and thresh, then what? Then psula. Then ultimately, again, it is going to be pasul. So we'll say, what is this a case? This is a case of lo efshar. In other words, you need the egla to nurse from its mother. So therefore, again, it's unavoidable. I have to attach the egla ultimately, again, to the same team as its mother in order that the egla nurses. And yet, but again, the kamachavi. Now, obviously, again, I have kavana, ultimately, again, to have benefit from the fact that now the egla rufa is also part of the team of oxen, right? Or the Gemara says, and yet, what do we see? It's psula. Halacha l'maisa. Ultimately, again, it's puzzle. So both say, so this is a raya to Rava against Abaye. This is a case of lo efshar, the kamachavin. It's unavoidable, but I have kavanah to get benefit. So halacha l'maisa, again, we see that it's puzzle. Shiny hasam dichsiv asher lo ubad ba mikomakom. We'll say it's different because the pasuk by Egla Arufa says that you could only use an Egla that what? Asher lo ubad ba, that was not worked. So because halacha l'maisa, again, work was done to it, therefore halacha l'maisa, the egla will be pasul. If that's the case, so we'll say if that's the case, then you're right. I understand that as soon as you attach the egla arufa to the team of oxen, then halacha l'maisa, it should certainly be usher. So why is the first case mutter? Amud Bezer will say, halo dami alalaha. Because both say the first case is comparable to another case. Shakin ala of kshera. Both listen to this. Let's say the egla arufa is minding its own business, and a bird came and rested on the back of the egla arufa. The egla arufa ultimately, again, is going to be kosher. Yet, Allah aleha zachar, if a male mounted the egla arufa, right, to mate with the egla arufa, psula, ultimately, again, the egla arufa is going to be pasul. They will say, what's the chilik between a bird landing on the back of the egla arufa and the male mounting the egla arufa to mate? Amar Papa ik. So listen to this. This is really incredible. Amar Papa said this. Iksiv avad vikarinan avad ad da avad beiyu. So we'll say, here's what I want to point out. The pasuk that the Gemara is referencing is as follows. When the Torah speaks out the egla arufa, the way the Torah describes an egla arufa is let me quote you the pasuk. Eglas bakar asher lo ubad ba. Asher lo ubad ba. Now we'll say we translate asher lo ubad ba, that it wasn't worked. Now watch this. So the Gemara says, but ubad, even though it's vocalized ubad, it's spelled aleph, vez, dalid, avad. So listen to this. Rav Papa says, Iksiv avad, vikarinan avad. If the pasuk would say avad, right, and we would read it as avad, Adda avad be'ihu, I would say that the egla rufa is kosher until the owner actively works the animal himself. Iksiv ubad, vikarinan ubad, and if it would be written ubad with the vav, and I would read it ubad, afilu mamela. So we'll say ubad means any work was done to it. In which case, again, I would say that any work that was done to the egla rufa, even just work happened to it, like the bird landing on its back, should be chayiv. Hashta dichsiv avad vikarinan ubad, but I will say now the word in the Torah is written as if it's avad, but it is pronounced as ubad. Therefore, what? We say that it's ubad dumya da avad. It has to be ubad that is like avad. What does that mean? Ma avad denechale. Just like I will say, avad means that the owner wants work done to it. Af ubad denechale. So too, when work happens to it, halacha lamaisa, even without the consent of the owner, has to be the type of work that the owner would consent to. So therefore, the Gemara says, when a bird lands on its back, ultimately, again, the owner would not consent to that. But halacha lamaisa, again, if the male mounts it, then halacha lamaisa, the owner would consent to that. I will say, I'm sorry. I'm not sure exactly what's going on over here. I don't know if someone else is... Okay, whatever it is. So the Gemara says as follows. Therefore, again, Av Uben Nechalis. Therefore, interesting enough, we don't have time for it now, but Tosis points out on... it's Tosis Allah Aleha Zachar Psula on Chavav Amid Beis. So Tosis points out over here something very interesting. Tosis says, when the male mounts the egla arufa, halacha l'maisa, why is that called nechale? That the owner doesn't want that, because the moment that happens, the egla becomes possible to be used as the egla. All right, so that's a you'll see Tosis ayin sham. But let's go weiter. Tashma aveda lo yishchaten al gabi mita v'lo gabi magud l'tzarcho. So let's listen to this. You find a lost object. So when you find a lost object, the halacha is you have an obligation to safeguard and to watch that object. So let's say you have the following situation, which means, I'd say, I find your cloak. So the halacha is, I have to go ahead and take care of your cloak until I'm able to return it to you. Part of that is like airing it out. Airing it out, so the Gemara says, if you have a lost cloak, lo yishtachena lo agabi mita v'lo agabi mogud l'tzarcho, aval shotcha l'tzarcha agabi mita v'lo agabi mogud. So let's listen to this. So let's say I'm having company and I want to show off that I have a beautiful cloak. I can't spread it out on a bed or on a peg for my own benefit, but I can spread it out on a bed or on a peg for the benefit of the item, to air out the item. Nizdamnu lo orchin, if halacha l'mais, again, guests come over, lo yishtachenu lo agabi mita v'lo agabi moged. In that case, you should not spread it out neither on a bed nor on a peg, bein litzarcha, bein litzarcho. Whether you're doing it for your benefit or for someone else's benefit, or for the benefit of the item. So we'll say, so what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'mais, this would be a case of what? Of lo efshar v'kamachavin. So we'll say this would be a case of I have to air out the item, and halacha l'maisa, again, even if I have kavana for my own intent, is going to be aser. To which the Gemara says shiny hasam dekalile. Ultimately, again, it's different over there. Why? Because halacha l'maisa, we're concerned that if you go ahead and you put it out, and there are guests there, the item will be burned. What does that mean? Abosai imishum inabisha. Maybe because, again, ayin hara, the guests will come. You'll make them jealous over what you have and what they lack, and therefore the item could be destroyed because of ayin hara or mishum ganavi. Or Abosai, once people see that halacha l'maisa, you have this item, it may attract thieves. So therefore, this really has nothing to do with lo efshar mechavin. This doesn't have to do with machlokes Abai and Rava. This is a different discussion. So two important takeaways come from this particular case, which is if you are guarding an item that you found, you're guarding a lost object, halacha l'maisa, you must exhibit care and concern over that object and take care of it properly to ensure that when the owner comes back, the item is in proper, tip-top shape. But halacha l'maisa, you have to be careful when you go ahead and you take care of it, that it does not attract unnecessary attention. Because we both say, if the things that I have attract unnecessary attention, I run the risk of losing them, either because of ayin hara or because of theft. Right? So we'll have to stop over here. I know we didn't get as far as I wanted to get today, but in Meretz Hashem, we will pick up at the Tashma tomorrow. I will say shekayach to everyone. Thank you again for accommodating me, and wishing everyone a freilichen Chanukah.